I was 25 the year I found myself driving to the heart of a desert I had never imagined seeing. Back home, in the quiet suburbs of America, I'd been just another boy trying to survive paycheck to paycheck. I worked odd jobs, loading boxes in warehouses, delivering food, fixing whatever needed fixing for a little extra cash. Life was small, predictable, and suffocating. I wanted more, though I never dared to say it out loud. Then came the offer that would change everything. An Arab sheikh was looking for a young driver, someone foreign, someone discreet. The job paid well, so well that I could have sent half the money back home and still live comfortably. I didn't ask too many questions. At 25, with no real ties and an endless hunger for something beyond my small life, I said yes. The first time I met him, I thought I had stepped into another world. He wasn't like any man I had ever seen, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in flowing white robes that seemed to catch the desert wind like sails. His eyes were dark, steady, carrying a weight that made me lower mine instinctively. He moved with quiet authority, as though the sand itself shifted to make way for him. He didn't smile, not at first, but there was something in the way he looked at me, measuring, calculating, that told me I had just walked into the orbit of someone dangerous and extraordinary. He spoke in English, though his accent was thick. "You drive?" he asked simply, as though he already knew the answer. I nodded. He gestured toward a long line of luxury cars parked in a courtyard that looked more like a palace garden than a driveway. "Then you drive for me." That was the beginning. No contracts, no formalities, just his word and my obedience. I learned quickly that working for the Sheikh wasn't just about driving. Yes, I steered his convoy of cars through the endless dunes, along highways that cut across deserts, into cities that glittered like mirages. But I was also expected to anticipate his needs. Silence when he wanted quiet, answers when he wanted them, presence without intrusion. He was a man who prized control, and every part of his world bent to his will. Servants bowed as he passed. Businessmen waited for hours just to exchange a few words with him. Women, beautiful women with eyes lined in coal, watched with a hunger I didn't fully understand. I was a stranger in his world, yet he let me stay close, closer than most. I was the one behind the wheel when he traveled, the one outside his tent when he camped beneath the stars, the one waiting by the door when he entered rooms where deals were made and secrets exchanged. I began to notice the smallest details. The way his hand rested on the edge of the window when he stared out across the desert. The way his silence filled a room more than words ever could. The way he carried a loneliness he never allowed to surface in public. At first, I told myself it was only curiosity, nothing more. He fascinated me the way powerful men fascinate the powerless. But over time, I began to feel something else, something I couldn't easily explain. It wasn't attraction in the way I had known it back home. It was sharper, tangled with awe and fear. When his eyes lingered on me longer than necessary, my chest tightened. When his hand brushed mine as he passed me a glass, I felt heat spread under my skin. I tried to dismiss it, to tell myself I was imagining things, but deep down I knew he saw me differently from the others who served him. There were moments, small, fleeting, when the mask he wore for the world slipped, and I glimpsed a man beneath the power. One evening, after a long day's journey across the desert, he sat beside me by the fire. The flames flickered against his face, softening his features. For once, he seemed less like a ruler and more like a man simply tired from carrying too much. He handed me a cup of tea, and when our fingers touched, he didn't pull away immediately. His gaze held mine for a heartbeat too long. "America," he said quietly, almost like a question. I nodded. "You miss it?" I didn't know how to answer. Did I miss home? The worn-down streets, the endless struggle, the life I had been so eager to leave? Sometimes, I admitted. He studied me for a while, then nodded. "You are different from the others. That is why I chose you." The words unsettled me. Different how? Different because I wasn't from his world, or because he saw something in me I didn't yet see in myself. That night, as I lay awake in the small quarters given to me, I kept replaying his words in my head. "That is why I chose you." The thought made me restless, uneasy, but also strangely alive. In the weeks that followed, His attention toward me grew more deliberate. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me in the rearview mirror as I drove. Sometimes he'd call me into his private quarters, not to give instructions, but simply to sit in silence as he read or wrote. It was as if my presence alone eased something in him. I didn't know what to make of it. I only knew that the line between servant and something else was beginning to blur, and with every passing day, I found myself stepping deeper into a life I hadn't chosen, but couldn't seem to walk away from. By the end of that first year, the desert no longer felt foreign. The Sheikh's world had become my own. Yet even as I adjusted to the wealth, the rituals, the unspoken rules of his household, one question lingered in the back of my mind. What exactly was I to him? A driver? A companion? Or something far more complicated? Something I wasn't ready to name? 3 years can pass in the blink of an eye, when every day feels like a dream you never thought you'd be living. That's how it was for me in the Sheikh's household. Life blurred into a rhythm of luxury and silence, of desert mornings and nights heavy with secrets. I drove him wherever he wished, through golden stretches of sand that seemed endless, into cities where marble towers reached the sky, along coastlines where the sea gleamed like liquid silver. I slept in villas more extravagant than anything I had ever imagined, ate meals prepared by chefs who plated food like art, wore clothes finer than anything my mother could have afforded for me back home. It was, in every sense, a golden cage. I had everything I could want, yet I knew none of it was truly mine. The cars, the palaces, the endless feasts, they belonged to him, and because I belonged to him, they became part of my world. Still, I never let myself forget that it could all vanish if he wished it so. Despite that shadow, there was a strange intimacy that developed between us in those 3 years. It wasn't spoken, not in the way lovers in America might talk of feelings or futures. The Sheikh didn't deal in words like love. Instead, his affection came in subtler forms. A glance across a crowded room, a gesture for me to sit beside him instead of standing at a distance, a moment where he would allow his hand to rest on my shoulder longer than necessary. He was not a man who gave freely, yet somehow he gave those moments to me. There were nights when the desert grew cold, and we'd sit near the fire, wrapped in silence. Sometimes he would tell me stories, not the kind you find in books, but fragments of his life. He spoke of his father, a stern man who valued power above tenderness. He spoke of battles fought within his own family, of cousins who envied him, of rivals who circled like wolves. He confessed, in the low murmur of midnight, that trust was the rarest currency in his world. Everyone wants something, he once said, staring into the flames. They smile, they bow, but behind their eyes there is always hunger. Do you understand? I didn't, not fully, but I listened, and he seemed to find comfort in that. In those moments, when the facade of the untouchable ruler cracked just enough for me to glimpse the man underneath, I felt something stir in me. I told myself it was compassion, loyalty, admiration, but sometimes it felt like more. There were times when I caught myself memorizing the way the firelight traced the sharp lines of his face, the way exhaustion softened his eyes, times when his silence spoke louder than any declaration could. And yet, I could never tell if he felt the same. He was a master control, after all. Perhaps he saw me as little more than a favorite possession, the way one might prize a rare horse or a loyal falcon. The thought haunted me, even as I continued to serve him faithfully. Still, I couldn't deny the privileges that came with his favor. While others in the household lived under strict hierarchies, I moved freely. Servants lowered their eyes when I passed, not because of who I was, but because of what my closeness to him implied. Men who once sneered at me now treated me with careful respect. At first, it made me feel powerful. Later, it only made me feel more trapped, because I couldn't tell where I ended and his world began. The Sheikh could be generous, lavishing me with gifts I never asked for, watches worth more than my old car back home, clothes tailored to fit me perfectly. But he could also be distant, shutting me out without explanation. Weeks would pass where he would hardly speak to me, even though I still drove him everywhere. He became a figure of silence in the back seat, his eyes fixed on some faraway thought, his presence colder than the desert wind at night. Those were the times I began to question myself. Had I done something wrong? Had I lost his interest? The fear clawed at me, because I had come to rely on his attention more than I ever admitted. His approval had become a kind of oxygen, and when it was withheld, I felt like I was suffocating. One evening, I walked past his chambers after being dismissed a night, and I heard laughter, deep, rolling, and not as alone. I froze outside the carved wooden doors. Inside, I could hear the voices of other men, friends of his who often visited, their tones light, full of ease. And I realized, with a sting of jealousy I couldn't explain, that he could give his warmth to others, but not always to me. That was the night I asked myself the question I had been avoiding for 3 years. Is this love, or am I just a possession he grew fond of? The answer wasn't clear. On one hand, he trusted me more than anyone else. He had told me so himself in rare moments of honesty. On the other hand, he held me in a grip so tight I sometimes forgot who I was before him. I wasn't just his driver anymore. I was his shadow, his companion, his secret. But secrets can be heavy, and I began to feel the weight of mine. When I looked at him across the campfires or through the rearview mirror, I saw a man who held my fate in his hands. And for the first time, I wondered how long he would keep holding it. 3 years. 3 years of loyalty, silence, and the blurred line between affection and captivity. And in the quiet corners of my mind, a whisper began to grow. Perhaps he was getting tired of me. Perhaps, just as quickly as he had chosen me, he could choose someone else. And that thought, cold and sharp, was the beginning of my doubts. The hunting trip began like so many others, but from the start I sensed something was different. The air in the palace was heavy with anticipation as servants rushed about, loading supplies into the convoy of gleaming SUVs. Guns were polished, falcons hooded, carpets rolled up to be laid under desert stars. I had been on these trips enough times to know the rhythm. Preparation, travel, camp, the hunt. Yet this time, there was a silence to the Sheikh that unsettled me. He stood in the courtyard overseeing everything, his robe shifting in the early dawn wind, his expression distant. Normally, he would make a comment to me, sometimes a brief instruction, sometimes nothing more than a pointed glance to make sure I was alert. But that morning, his eyes skimmed over me as if I were part of the furniture. It stung in a way I couldn't explain. I drove as the convoy pulled out of the city and into the endless desert. The line of vehicles snaked across the golden dunes, their engines growling low and steady. The Sheikh sat in the back seat, silent, staring out at the horizon as if the world outside the window held answers I couldn't see. I wanted to ask what weighed on him, but I knew better. My role was to drive, not a question. By late afternoon, we reached the hunting grounds. Servants set up the camp with a practiced efficiency. Tents rose in the sand like white sails. Carpets were unrolled, lanterns strung. A fire pit was dug and lined with stones, where soon whole lambs would roast. I helped where I could, though my main duty was staying close to the Sheikh. When the hunting began, I followed him into the desert. We rode in silence, rifles slung over shoulders, the air crisp and dry. There was a thrill in those hunts, not because I cared for the kill, but because the desert felt alive at night, its silence broken only by the calls of falcons and the distant barking of hounds. The Sheikh moved like a man born for the wild, steady and focused, his robe trailing behind him as he mounted his camel and disappeared into the dunes. I kept up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping between us. He didn't glance back to see if I followed. He didn't call for me the way he usually did when the desert swallowed our companions. His mind was elsewhere, and I felt it like a physical distance. That night, after the hunt, we gathered around the fire. The Sheikh's friends, for men of his rank, boisterous and loud, laughed and toasted each other, their voices rising to the star-filled sky. I sat where I always did, a little apart, ready if the Sheikh needed me. But he barely looked at me. He laughed with them, poured them drinks, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt invisible. When the feast was finished and the stars burned brighter overhead, the Sheikh rose. His presence silenced the group instantly, and he turned to me. For a heartbeat, I thought he would summon me to his side, as always. Instead, he gestured toward his friends. "Go with them," he said simply, his tone flat, commanding. I blinked, not understanding. "My lord," his gaze didn't soften. "Entertain them." The words hit me like a blow. At first, I thought I had misheard. Surely he wouldn't. After 3 years, after everything, we had sat by fires together, shared silences, exchanged truths he told no one else. Surely he wouldn't hand me over like a gift to men who had never spoken to me beyond polite nods. But the look in his eyes told me I hadn't misheard. He was giving me away. I felt the blood drain from my face, my chest tightening until it was hard to breathe. My feet stayed rooted in the sand, unwilling to move. Why? I wanted to ask, but the word never left my throat. His friends grinned, rising to their feet with the lazy arrogance of men who were used to being handed whatever they desired. One of them clapped me on the shoulder, already pulling me away from the fire. The Sheikh turned his back, his robe shifting as he returned to his seat, as if the matter no longer concerned him. Betrayal burned hotter than the fire at my side. I stumbled as they pulled me toward the tents, my heart pounding in my ears. Every step felt like a fracture, as though the ground itself was giving way beneath me. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but where would I go? I was deep in the desert, surrounded by men loyal to him, bound to his word. Inside the tent, the air was thick with the scent of incense and wine. The men laughed as they closed the flap behind us, their eyes hungry in a way that made my stomach twist. My body was there, but my mind broke away, retreating into memory of 3 years of loyalty, of the moments I thought meant something, the nights he had confided in me, the glances that lingered, the trust one thought was real. Why is he doing this to me? The question echoed in my skull like thunder. I had given him everything, my youth, my silence, my devotion, and now, when I thought I carved out some place in his guarded heart, he discarded me like a coin tossed to beggars. I wanted to hate him. God, I wanted to hate him in that moment. But beneath the anger was something more dangerous. Sorrow. Sorrow that the man I had believed in could treat me as nothing more than property to be passed around. The night dragged on like a cruel test. I endured their laughter, their stares, the suffocating weight of being handed over. My body shook, not from cold, but from the realization that I had been wrong all along. Whatever I had thought existed between the Sheikh and me, love, affection, something deeper, it had been an illusion. When they finally left me alone, I sank to the floor of the tent, burying my face in my hands. The desert outside was silent, but inside me a storm raged. 3 years of loyalty reduced to nothing in a single night. I wanted to disappear into the sand, to erase myself from the story altogether. And yet, even in my despair, part of me clung to a single thought. Why? Why had he done this? Was it punishment? A test? Or had I truly never meant anything to him at all? The not knowing was the cruelest part. That night, as I lay awake on the cold carpet of the tent, listening to the distant crackle of the fire, I felt something break inside me. Whatever we had, or whatever I thought we had, was shattered, and for the first time since I had entered his world, I wondered if I would survive it. That night stretched endlessly. Every hour an ocean I thought I would drown in. I sat in the tent long after the Sheikh's friends had left, the scent of smoke and wine clinging to the air, my body trembling as if it no longer belonged to me. My chest burned with humiliation, my throat tight with unshed words. Rage warred with grief, leaving me hollow and shaking. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Was I ever loved, or was I only ever used? It was a cruel loop, tearing me apart. The man who had once let me sit by his side in silence, who had trusted me enough to speak of his wounds, had turned me into an object for a companion's amusement. Every glance, every word of trust, every rare flicker of warmth suddenly seemed poisoned, a lie I had been foolish enough to believe. I pressed my palms into my eyes until sparks of light burst behind them, willing myself not to cry. But the tears came anyway, hot and bitter. I hated myself for it, hated that even in this betrayal, part of me still longed for him, that part of me whispered excuses. Maybe it was a test, maybe he didn't mean it, maybe I had misunderstood. But deep down, another voice cut sharper. No, he knew exactly what he was doing. Hours passed like centuries. The desert wind howled against the canvas walls of the tent, rattling them as if the night itself mocked me. Outside, I could hear faint bursts of laughter from the campfire, the Sheikh's voice among them. My stomach twisted at the sound. He was out there, alive and whole, while I sat here broken, questioning my worth. I thought of confronting him, storming out, shouting my rage into his face. But fear held me back. Fear of his power, his command, his ability to crush me with a single word. I had seen him end alliances with nothing more than a flick of his hand. What would he do to me if I defied him? The tent flap stirred, and for a moment I thought it was him. Instead, one of his friends stumbled back in, drunk and grinning. He looked me over the way a predator eyes prey. My whole body stiffened, survival instinct clawing to my fog of despair. I forced myself to sit up straighter, to meet his gaze with steel instead of weakness. Not tonight, I said, my voice low but firm. His smile faltered. He laughed, muttered something in Arabic I didn't understand, and left. But the moment seared into me. I realized then that if I let myself crumble completely, I'd be destroyed. The only weapon I had left was my refusal, to surrender the last shred of myself. So I clung to it. I thought back to the boy I had been before all this, the boy in America who worked double shifts to keep food on the table, who dreamed of a bigger life even when the world seemed intent on keeping him small. That boy had fought to survive long before Sheikh ever entered his world. He had endured loneliness, poverty, rejection. He had carved out a place for himself with nothing but grit. I wasn't nothing. I wasn't disposable. The thought grew louder with each passing hour. Yes, the Sheikh had power. Yes, he had wealth beyond imagining. But he could not erase who I was at my core. He could use me, discard me, test me. But he could not take away my will to exist, to endure, to remain myself. And slowly, I began to feel a strange strength rising from the very pit of my humiliation. It wasn't loud or defiant. It was quiet, steady, like a fire catching hold in the ashes. I would not let this night define me. At some point, I stepped outside the tent. The desert stretched before me, endless and dark, the sky a river of stars. The campfire still burned in the distance, where shadows of men moved, their laughter faint on the wind. And then I saw him, the Sheikh. He sat slightly apart from his companions, his profile outlined by firelight. His face was unreadable, but his gaze was fixed on me. For a moment, our eyes locked across the distance. My chest tightened, rage and longing colliding like storms. Did he know what he had done to me? Was this his plan all along, to break me and see if I could be remade? His stillness, the deliberate calm in the way he sat, told me one thing. He was watching. He had been watching all along. The realization chilled me. This wasn't neglect or accident. It was deliberate, a twisted test, some cruel game of loyalty and strength. I turned away, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I went back into the tent, clenched my fists, and made myself breathe through the storm in my chest. My heart still ached, my body still trembled, but my spirit had shifted. If this was a test, then I would endure it, not for him, but for myself, because I would not let him decide my worth. The hours crept on. I lay awake, staring at the canvas above me, replaying my life like fragments of film. My mother's laugh, the smell of cheap coffee in the mornings, the weight of my first paycheck in my hand. The lonely nights when I thought I'd never escape the smallness of my world. The hope that had carried me here, and the danger of forgetting it. That was the turning point. Somewhere between night and dawn, I stopped being only his driver, his possession, his discarded shadow. I remembered I was my own person, forged by struggles long before this desert. And though the Sheikh's gaze still lingered in my mind, heavy and testing, I no longer feared it the same way. I had been humiliated, yes. Betrayed, yes. But broken? No. I was still standing. The desert outside was beginning to pale, the first hint of dawn spreading across the horizon. The longest night of my life was ending, and with it, something inside me had hardened into resolve. If the Sheikh thought he could unmake me, he was wrong. Morning broke over the desert in a wash of pale gold, the horizon glowing as if the sun itself was dragging me into a reckoning I could no longer avoid. The camp stirred with quiet activity, servants folding carpets, extinguishing the dying embers of the fire, men preparing the falcons for another hunt. I had barely slept But my body was restless, my heart pounding with a single truth. I couldn't remain silent. Not after last night. I found him standing a little apart from the others, his silhouette cut sharp against the rising sun. He looked like a figure from a story, eternal and untouchable, his robes flowing in the morning breeze. For 3 years I had seen him this way, larger than life, carved out of stone and fire. But today, something in me refused to bow to that illusion. Today, he was only a man who had hurt me. I walked straight toward him, my steps crunching in the sand. He turned as I approached, his dark eyes narrowing slightly, as if he'd been expecting me all along. "You," I began, my voice hoarse but steady, gave me to them. No greeting, no preamble, just the truth hanging heavy in the air between us. His expression didn't change. He regarded me in silence, the desert wind tugging at the edge of his robe. Finally, he said, "You are still standing." The words were like salt on a wound. My hands clenched at my sides. "Is that what you wanted to see? Whether I would survive being treated like property? Was that your plan?" His gaze held mine, unflinching. I wanted to see if he would break. The anger surged hot in my chest. And if I had broken under it, would that have satisfied you? 3 years I've given you. 3 years of loyalty, silence, trust, and this is what you give me in return. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. Let him see my rage. Let him see my pain. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a sigh so soft it was nearly lost to the wind, he looked away. "You do not understand my world," he murmured. "Then explain it to me." I shot back, because from where I stand, it looks like cruelty. It looks like betrayal. And if that's what your world demands, then I don't belong in it. That made him turn sharply, his eyes flashing with something I had never seen before, fear or perhaps desperation. "It is not betrayal," he said, his voice low, urgent. "It is survival. Power is built on fear, on dominance. If I show weakness, I lose everything. If I show love—" He stopped, the word hanging between us like a forbidden flame. My breath caught. "If you show love, what?" His jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "If I show love, they will use it against me. They will destroy it. You think you are invisible, but every man here watches. Every servant, every ally, every enemy. They know I favor you. If I treat you as more than that, they will find a way to take it from me." The truth settled heavy in my chest. He hadn't discarded me out of disinterest. He had thrown me into the fire to see if I could endure it, if I was strong enough to survive his world. But the knowledge didn't lessen the pain. "So I'm a test to you," I said bitterly. "Not a man. Not someone who—" I cut myself off before the word love slipped out. "Not someone who matters." His face shifted then, the mask cracking just slightly. He stepped closer, his voice lower, rougher. "You matter more than I can say. That is why I had to know. If you are weak, you die in my world. And I cannot—" He stopped again, closed his eyes as if the words themselves were dangerous. "I cannot lose you." The silence between us throbbed with everything unspoken. I shook my head, my throat tight. "You can't claim to care about me while treating me like I'm disposable. I am not a possession. I am not your servant to hand around when it suits you. I am a man. If you want me beside you, you see me as an equal, or you see me not at all." For the first time in 3 years, the great Sheikh faltered. His shoulders dropped, the weight of his pride slipping. His eyes, those dark, guarded eyes, glimmered with something raw, something human. He looked at me not as a ruler, not as a master, but as a man stripped of defenses. "I have never trusted anyone," he said finally, his voice breaking in ways I had never heard. "Not my family, not my friends, not even the men who would kill for me. Trust is death in my world. But you—" His breath hitched, and he shook his head. "You stayed. You listened. You gave me silence when I needed it, words when I asked for them. You're the only one I have ever allowed near me. And last night," he swallowed hard, his gaze dropping. "Last night I was afraid. Afraid of what you mean to me. Afraid of how much you could hurt me. So I hurt you first." His confession hung heavy in the air. My chest ached with the force of it. with the truth I had longed for and dreaded all at once. "You broke me," I whispered. He looked at me then, truly looked, and in his eyes I saw no pride, no power, only regret. "And still you stand before me, stronger than before. You are not my possession. You are my proof that I can trust, that I can—" Again, the word love hovered on his lips, unspoken but alive. I stepped back, my head spinning. His vulnerability was as sharp as his cruelty had been, and I didn't know whether to embrace it or push it away. But one truth rose above the chaos. If we were to continue, it had to be different. "I can't be your shadow anymore," I said quietly but firmly. "If you want me here, it is as your equal. Otherwise, I walk away." The desert was silent around us. He stared at me, his chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths. Then, slowly, he bowed his head, not in defeat, but in surrender. "You have my respect," he said softly. "My trust. My—" He broke off, his voice too heavy to continue. "Stay, not as my possession, but as the only man I cannot replace." For the first time, I believed him. The desert morning broke differently that day. I remember how the horizon burned with light, painting the dunes gold, and how the air, for the first time in years, felt free on my skin. I had confronted the Sheikh the night before, ripped open every wound, every doubt, every question I had carried, and against all odds he had listened. He had cracked, and when he looked at me, eyes stripped of their armor, his voice breaking, it was as if I was seeing him for the first time. Not a ruler, not a predator, not the man who held my future in his palm, but just a human being, trembling with the same fear I had wrestled with for years, the fear of losing what mattered most. We didn't speak much that morning. Words seemed too heavy, too fragile, and maybe too sacred to throw around casually. Instead, he followed me out of the tent. His men were packing up the camp, busy with ropes and supplies, pretending not to watch us. I could feel their eyes, the way they flickered between curiosity and unease. Last night had changed something, not just between the Sheikh and me, but in the way his entire world saw us. I stopped by the camel he had brought for me, running my hand along its saddle. He came up behind me slowly, almost cautiously, as though afraid of scaring me away. "I was wrong," he said finally, his voice barely more than the whisper of sand shifting in the wind. "You are not mine to command. You never were. You are here because you chose to be, and I forgot that." The words settled into me like cool water on burned skin. I turned to face him. His eyes were tired, rimmed with shadows, but honest in a way I had never seen before. I didn't need him to kneel, to beg, or make grand promises. I needed only the truth, and for the first time he gave it. "I forgive you," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "but not as your servant, not as your possession. If I stay, it has to be different. It has to be real. Respect, equality, freedom. Otherwise, I walk away and never look back." For a long moment, silence stretched between us, heavy with the possibility that he might not accept it, that he might retreat back into the fortress of his pride and power. But then he nodded, not once, not lazily, but with the weight of a man making a vow he knew would define him. "Then different it will be," he said. That day, everything changed. He called the others to him, the men who had always seen me as nothing more than a foreigner filling a role. With a tone sharper than any sword, he announced that I was no longer his driver, no longer shadow at his side. I was his partner, his equal. They exchanged uncertain glances, but none dared question him. And I realized that even in the language of power, he was rewriting the rules for me. The weeks that followed were strange at first. I wasn't used to the freedom. I wasn't used to being asked my opinion about things that had once been none of my business. The choice of routes, the people he trusted in negotiations, even the lands he wished to hunt. He gave me space to breathe, to rediscover who I was outside of his orbit. And yet, he never drifted far. At night, when the rest of the household fell quiet, he came to me not as a master, but as a man who wanted nothing more than my presence. We shared conversations that stretched into dawn about his childhood, about my hometown I hadn't seen in years, about what love might look like if we let it be simple instead of twisted by fear. One evening, As we sat by the desert fire, he reached for my hand, not to claim it, but to hold it. His grip was tentative, almost boyish. "I never trusted anyone," he admitted, staring at the flames. "Until you. That terrifies me more than anything." I squeezed his hand gently. "Then maybe that's a point," I whispered, "to let someone terrify you and still choose them anyway." From then on, things grew easier. Not perfect, but real. The luxury around us no longer felt like a cage, but a backdrop we could choose to embrace or leave behind. Sometimes we stayed in the palace with its marble halls and endless servants. Other times, we rode into the desert with nothing but tents, camels, and silence. But wherever we went, it was by choice, mine as much as his. The bond between us deepened, stripped of games and tests. He gave me independence, even offered me opportunities beyond him. He supported me when I wanted to invest in small projects back home, reminded me that my life extended beyond his shadow. And I stayed, not because I was bound, but because I wanted to. Because beneath the weight of power, beneath the secrets and scars, I had found a man who, in his own way, loved me. The last memory I'll hold forever is one simple moment. We returned to the desert for another hunting trip. The convoy stretched behind us, the air alive with the rhythm of hooves. But this time, he didn't ride ahead while I followed. We rode side by side. He looked at me, the sun burning behind him, and smiled, not the calculating smile I had once known, but one that spoke of peace, of surrender. I realized then that I had entered this world as a servant, but I was leaving it as something else entirely. Not a driver, not a possession, but a partner, his equal, his choice. And as the desert opened before us, endless and untamed, I knew I was loved. Truly, finally and freely loved.